We begin this morning with major new developments in one of the ongoing investigations into former President Trump.
Yeah, this one is the grand jury proceeding in the Manhattan DA's years-long investigation into alleged hush money payments made to Stormy Daniels back in 2016. One final witness is expected to testify today, and lawyer Rob Costello says he was contacted by Trump's legal team to appear before the grand jury to discuss what he knows about the payments. His testimony is expected to contradict key witness and former Trump attorney Michael Cohen's version of events. The former president has denied any wrongdoing. Over the weekend, Trump took to social media, calling on his supporters to protest a potential indictment. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard joins us now from West Palm Beach, Florida, with the latest on this. Vaughn, good morning. So first, can you just walk us through what we can expect to see today? What do we know about attorney Rob Costello, and will Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen testify again?
Right, Zinclay and Valerie, this is the secret grand jury proceedings here out of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which have left a lot of question marks exactly where this process, where this investigation stands. But what we now know is that as of yesterday afternoon, Michael Cohen, the former fixer and lawyer to Donald Trump, who flipped on the former president and is now the key witness in this probe, he now says that he will, in fact, be on standby later this afternoon to go before that grand jury again as a potential rebuttal to another witness. That witness being his former legal advisor, Robert Costello. Listen to Michael Cohen on MSNBC yesterday.
I was asked to make myself available and to be at the DA's office tomorrow as a rebuttal witness. This is not about a vendetta. This is not about, as my book, revenge. This is about Donald Trump being held accountable for his own dirty deeds. Plain and simple. I don't want to see anyone, and that includes Donald Trump, indicted, prosecuted, convicted, incarcerated, because I fundamentally, or the country fundamentally disagrees with so much of what comes out of his mouth. I want to see him held accountable for charges that he's guilty of.
So come this afternoon, guys, there is the potential that both Costello and Cohen go before the grand jury as these proceedings continue.
Okay, Vaughn, quickly here, are there questions about Michael Cohen's credibility as a key witness in this case?
Yes, there definitely are. Michael Cohen served 3 years, three-year prison term. Michael Cohen is somebody who pleaded guilty to federal prosecutors in the past. The federal prosecutors at the time said that he had a history of deception. A judge said that he had given in 2020 misleading and false statements when he appealed his prison sentence. Yet Michael Cohen, he has testified for hundreds of hours at this point as part of the Mueller probe in front of Congress, and even the Mueller prosecutors themselves had written in a statement that they believed his statements in the past to have been credible. But the question is, to what extent had he been cooperating? Michael Cohen now makes the case that he is being wholly forthright here with these investigators.
Important analysis. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you so much.
Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos for more on this. Danny, good morning. This case dates back nearly 7 years. Why did it take so long for the state to bring this in front of a grand jury? What's at stake here?
Possibly the time was because Trump was in office, and there may have been an argument that he was immune and that told the statute of limitations. But it's still a risk. At the core, this is a prosecution that would happen if it did 6, 7 years after the conduct alleged, and that creates problems. Whether or not a statute of limitations prohibits it, anytime you bring charges that many years afterwards, evidence fades, memories fade, witnesses disappear, sometimes they die. So that makes things a little problematic. This is a paper-intensive case, so maybe not so much. But certainly, when it comes to getting witnesses, that always makes it more difficult, especially if this ends up being a misdemeanor case, which is a possibility.
I mean, to that end, what kind of criminal charges could the former president be facing, and what evidence would the prosecution have to bring forward?
Most people have been talking about falsifying business records. In New York, that is a misdemeanor, unless it's used to conceal another crime, in which case it gets bumped up to a felony. But what is the other crime? What if it's election law violations, New York State or federal? Couple problems there. Number one, it's a novel legal theory. Number two, can the state consider a federal crime as part of that predicate crime for the felony? And number three, you have a situation where it isn't that clear of a violation of election law. The classic violation is I give you a bag of cash and you fail to report that bag of cash. The theory here is much more attenuated. The idea is that by Michael Cohen opening up his pocket, paying Stormy Daniels, and then Michael Cohen being reimbursed, that crime, that election law crime, is the benefit of Stormy Daniels' silence, not a bag of money, her silence. And if you use that argument, almost anything good that happens to a campaign might be a campaign contribution that has to be reported. So it's a slippery slope.
And Danny, we know this is unprecedented. No U.S. president has ever been charged with a crime. Does this influence the proceedings here?
Of course it does. I mean, in fact, even the proceedings for arrest, you can't possibly do what with former President Trump what you would do with a normal arrestee in New York County. You can't send him to the precinct, do some processing, and then send him to the central booking and stick him in a cell while he waits for court. That's not going to work. So the idea that nobody's above the law and everybody's equal under the law is kind of true, but not really when it comes to things like presidential security. Look, if they can block off the road and cause traffic for the rest of us, then the president is different. Similarly, if he's arrested, even a former president is different. There are security concerns.
All right, should be an interesting week.
Yeah, for sure. It will.
Thank you.
Former President Trump is calling on his supporters to protest ahead of his potential arrest. In a post on social media over the weekend, he told his supporters to, quote, take back the nation if he's indicted. Offline on Capitol Hill, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy pushed back against the former president's call to protest.
I don't think people should protest this, no. And I think President Trump, if you talk to him, he doesn't believe that either.
But despite this, McCarthy slammed the investigation as a, quote, outrageous abuse of power. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins us now with more. Ryan, good morning. So we just heard from McCarthy there. How have Republican lawmakers responded to Trump's social media post?
Well, Zigley, they really have rallied around Donald Trump. They're echoing his calls that they believe that this is an unfair prosecution and that the district attorney in Manhattan is nothing more than a progressive essentially vigilante that's out to get Donald Trump and is supported by George Soros, who is, of course, a big Democratic donor. What we see is almost a rallying cry by many of these Republicans, especially in the House of Representatives, who really are kind of the base of the Republican Party and really the base of support for Donald Trump. And take it a step further, Kevin McCarthy has even suggested that the House Judiciary Committee, even perhaps the Oversight Committee, launch an investigation into Alvin Bragg to see if his conduct here is inappropriate. So right now, Donald Trump really getting a lot of support, particularly from these House Republicans who are among his biggest supporters. And Ryan, notably, sort of in a different vein, McCarthy did distance himself from Trump's call to protest. Have others come out with similar sentiments? Yeah, it's interesting. These Republicans are a little leery about the idea of a protest. And it's not just because they don't necessarily think that that's a good idea, but they also think that it could get some of Trump's supporters in trouble. Listen to what the former Vice President Mike Pence had to say about it.
He's calling on people to protest, to come out and protest, take our nation back. We know what happened the last time he said that.
Well, John, the American people have a constitutional right to peaceably assemble. The violence that occurred on January 6th, the violence that occurred in cities throughout this country in the summer of 2020 was a disgrace. The American people won't tolerate it.
So you hear Pence there essentially saying it's okay to protest, but don't take it too far. You heard some of Trump's other supporters, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance, suggest that if Trump's supporters engage in some level of protest, that they could be being trapped by federal investigators, kind of a conspiracy theory that was an outcry from January 6th. So there isn't necessarily a lot of rallying of support behind this idea of mass protests behind the former President Donald Trump, even from his Republican allies. And Ryan, we're kind of going across the aisle here because the sentiment appears to be clear among the president's supporters in Congress. But have we heard from any moderate Republicans or from Democrats on this? Yeah, Democrats seem to be holding their fire right now, allowing the process to play itself out, to see if an indictment actually happens before taking too strong of a stance. But even some moderate Republicans are still echoing these talking points from the Republican Party and from the Trump campaign that perhaps there's some sort of two-tiered system of justice that Donald Trump's the victim of. But here's a sample of what some of these elected officials had to say.
No one is above the law, not even the former president of the United States.
The viable question for the American people is whether or not you have a progressive prosecutor using the justice system to go after political enemies for a political splash.
I would hope that if they brought charges that they have a strong case, because this is, as you said, it's unprecedented.
There's no doubt that this is going to dominate the conversation on Capitol Hill this week. There isn't a lot of significant legislation that's being debated right now. The House Republicans are in Florida for their retreat, where this is going to be a big topic of conversation. So we'll have to see if this indictment plays out and how that really impacts the day-to-day business in Washington.
Ryan Nobles, thanks so much. Turning now to a high-stakes summit between two of the world's most powerful nations, which could have major implications for the war in Ukraine. China's President Xi Jinping is in Russia for a state visit. He's expected to sit down with Russian President Vladimir Putin for a meeting that will be closely watched by the United States. Over the weekend, Putin visited Crimea and the Russian-occupied city of Mariupol in a show of defiance, days after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for him over the deportation of Ukrainian children. Moscow denies the charges. Writing in a Chinese newspaper, Putin welcomed Xi's, quote, willingness to play a constructive role in resolving the crisis, calling him a good old friend. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer is with us from Beijing, and we're also joined by NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. Good morning to you both. Janice, let's start with you. President Xi also wrote an article in Russian media ahead of his visit. What's the message for Putin when it comes to the war?
Well, in this article, Xi Jinping called for pragmatism on Ukraine. He pushed China's 12-point proposal, which has been largely dismissed by the West, and also talked of a world that was threatened by hegemony, despotism, and bullying. Quote, there is no universal model of government, and there is no world order where the decisive word belongs to a single country. Xi is talking, of course, not about Russia and its war in Ukraine, but about the United States. This will be closely watched, as you say, and also very highly scrutinized. These two men consider themselves good friends. They've met more than 40 times. But the China-Russia relationship itself is largely unsentimental. It relies on trade and also on strategic opportunity, in that both of them find some common ground in their opposition to the U.S. and American foreign policy. But that Xi Jinping, the leader of a powerful country in the world, would even visit Moscow at a time when the war in Ukraine is raging is going to be seen as a huge symbolic victory for Vladimir Putin.
Mike, what's the reaction in Washington to this symbolic meeting, as Janice just said? How is the White House viewing it?
Well, what we've been hearing from administration officials, obviously there's concern about what they expect, but also where there's some uncertainty about this meeting. Let's start there. The biggest question heading into this meeting is whether China might be willing to do more to both shore up Russia economically at a time when we've seen obviously strong Western sanctions against Russia. Will they go further in providing lethal aid to Russia in support of their fight against Ukraine? But then where there's an expectation, and White House officials have been working hard to sort of pre-butt this, is the idea that China is going to again try to play the role of peacekeeper here, promoting the idea of a ceasefire. You heard John Kirby from the National Security Council really responding to that ahead of this over the weekend. Take a listen.
There's no question that both China and Russia, and this is right out in the national security strategy, are two countries that are chafing against this international rules-based order. If, coming out of this meeting, there's some sort of call for a ceasefire, well, that's just going to be unacceptable, because all that's going to do, Mike, is ratify Russia's conquest to date. All that's going to do is give Mr. Putin more time to refit, retrain, reman, and try to plan for renewed offensives at a time of his choosing.
We've talked about this so often, the idea that President Biden views our foreign policy as a contest between autocracies like China and Russia and of democracies like the United States. That's why we've seen the president really working to shore up those Western alliances of late. Last week, I was in San Diego when he was with the prime ministers of Australia and the United Kingdom announcing that nuclear submarine deal. And this week, President Biden will make his first trip to Canada is taking office, a key G7 and NATO member there as well.
And Janice, this visit comes after China secured a major diplomatic coup, brokering a deal to help restore ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Is China pushing to be more influential on the world stage? What is Beijing aiming to get out of this trip?
Well, as Mike mentioned, Chinese officials are framing Xi's visit as a trip for peace, though China's role as peacemaker in this dispute is debatable. The two men a year ago, just before Russia launched its invasion, declared a partnership with no limits. We've seen ties only deepen. Beijing has tried to straddle the issue because it doesn't want to risk straining ties with Putin. So China goes into this kind of with its hands tied, but with more leverage in Russia, considering the degree of economic dependence that Moscow has on Beijing these days. Xi Jinping is not likely to leave Moscow empty-handed, as they say, but then it's an issue of what happens with it. There is speculation he's supposed to have a phone call with President Zelensky later in the week. There's already been a phone conversation, a very rare one, between the foreign ministers of China and Ukraine. But the U.S. has already said it's opposed to anything that's going to ratify Russian conquest. Russia has said that it's not going to agree to anything that doesn't include territory that it already controls. And Ukraine's government is saying that it's not going to agree to any sort of concessions. So it's unclear what Xi Jinping is going to come up with. It will certainly probably fall short of any meaningful settlement.
And Mike, we understand that the White House is trying to soften its tone on China ahead of this meeting. That's according to current and former U.S. officials. Tell us a little bit about why that is and what NBC News has learned.
Well, President Biden has been consistent. He wants to see a relationship of competition, not conflict, between the United States and China. But we've been veering ever closer to conflict, especially in the wake of that Chinese spy balloon incident over U.S. soil. We saw the cancellation of that meeting between Secretary of State Tony Blinken and his Chinese counterpart in Beijing. So the U.S., with a real concern about what I mentioned earlier, the possibility of China providing lethal aid to Russia, has been softening its tone, trying to dial back the rhetoric a bit, because as one U.S. official told our colleagues Carol Lee and Courtney Kuby, they don't want to put China in a box here where they feel they need to not show any weakness by not providing that aid. That being said, U.S. officials are also considering what potential sanctions they might impose on China if they go ahead with them.
All right, Janice and Mike, thank you both so much. The start of a new week is bringing more uncertainty in the banking world and on Wall Street. And in an effort to stabilize the financial industry, Swiss banking giant UBS agreed to buy its struggling rival Credit Suisse in a $3.2 billion deal.
But the acquisition did not have the calming effect many hoped for. Instead, it's shaking up the markets in a major way this morning. Caleb Silver, editor-in-chief at Investopedia, joins us now to talk about this. Good morning, Caleb. So markets are open in other parts of the world, and shares of Credit Suisse have plunged by more than 60%. We know U.S. futures are also down. Not a great reaction from investors. Is this a bad sign?
Well, it's never a good sign when one bank is sort of persuaded to take over another bank. Call it a shotgun wedding, Swiss style, but hold the fondue here. This is Credit Suisse, which was having a lot of trouble here, and now the Swiss government first offering it a $54 billion loan last week to pay its depositors, now making this merger happen with UBS, a huge competitor. Credit Suisse is a 167-year-old bank being taken over by a competitor in Switzerland, not sitting that great in the banking sector. Markets overall, they're kind of okay, and if you looked last week, unbelievably, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ both rose for the first week in several, while the Dow, which is heavier with financial stocks, suffered a little bit. So the banking sector is really feeling the impact of this in the markets. The rest of the markets are kind of digesting it. Big Fed meeting this week, though.
And Caleb, what does this deal and the reaction to it mean for our money here? Is this of a concern?
Not necessarily, because these are two big Swiss banks, and Credit Suisse had troubles that were very different from what was going on at Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank and other regional banks here in the U.S. That said, all banks are kind of connected in this global financial system we have today. We learned that back in 2008. We're learning it again now. So when there's trouble in the banks, especially these multi-trillion-dollar institutions, we feel it ultimately.
And to that end, right, we're all interconnected. Many banks internationally have rallied together to support the U.S. dollar. What does that mean for us?
Yeah, what that actually means is that their banks loan each other dollars, and the Fed and central banks loan banks dollars to what they call the discount window. So usually that's a 7-day borrow. Now they've said you can borrow for as much as 1 day or as little as 1 day, because what does the Fed want to do, and the central banks of Canada, England, ECB, Japan, and others? They want to make liquidity available, make sure there's plenty of money out there so banks can loan money to one another and to their customers. That's what this is. It's not necessarily trying to boost the dollar, just make more dollars available so we don't get into a liquidity crunch like we saw in 2008.
And Senator Elizabeth Warren is a member of the Bank Committee. Over the weekend, she sent a letter to the Fed, the Treasury, and the FDIC asking for a probe into the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, which started all of this. She was on Meet the Press yesterday. She was asked if she thinks that the president should fire Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Let's listen to what she had to say.
Look, my views on Jay Powell are well known at this point. He has had two jobs. One is to deal with monetary policy. One is to deal with regulation. He has failed at both.
Right. Would you advise President Biden to replace him?
Look, I don't think he should be chairman of the Federal Reserve. I have said it as publicly as I know how to say it. I've said it to everyone.
Some strong words from her there. What's your reaction to that? And are we hearing similar thoughts from other people in the financial industry?
You've heard a little bit about that, but don't forget, Fed Chair Powell is the president of the Federal Reserve, but there's also a huge Fed Board of Governors. It's not just him. He gets all the attention because he is the one that has to go out and face the public, but he's part of the FOMC. That's a huge committee of policymakers, and the president can't fire the Fed chair unless it's for cause. Is there a cause here? He's trying to deal with two crises at the same time. I don't think that's going to happen. Not the first time we've heard Senator Warren say that. Probably not the last.
Yeah, we'll hear from the Fed chair later this week.
Right.
Caleb Silver, thank you so much.
Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather and the latest on a storm system hitting the west.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now with more on the first day of spring. Michelle, good morning.
Hi there, guys. Great to see you. And yeah, the first day of spring arrives later on this evening around 5:24 Eastern time. And it's very winter-like across the country. We're feeling chilly in the east, really cold in portions of the south, and then winter weather once again in the west. So we have back-to-back storms that we're watching in the west. The first one came through yesterday. We're still seeing the rain and snow from that. We're still seeing lots of snow in the higher elevations. And then a more powerful storm systems, it will come on shore tomorrow, and that's going to bring feet of snow in the higher elevation mountains. And we're going to see some rain in Southern California once again. So winter alerts for 2 million people this morning. We're looking at winter storm warnings, winter storm watches, and winter weather advisory. Your winter storm warning, that is in the pink. The winter storm watch is in the blue. So we're looking at up to 4 feet of snow in some spots. Also very windy. This will be for tomorrow. 18 million people impacted. We're going to see winds gusting up to 60, 70 miles per hour. That's going to bring down some trees. Also some power lines. That includes portions of Southern California. The ground is still really wet. So, of course, we do have the concern for those trees coming down. And then additional power outages. We're looking at the storm system moving on shore tomorrow. Today, we're looking at that heavy snow and rain into the Four Corners, steady showers lingering throughout the northwest. Tomorrow, the storm system will bring some flood threat to portions of Southern California. An atmospheric river, once again, will enhance that precipitation. This will move off to the east as we head towards Wednesday. And then this will become our next cross-country storm. We're eventually going to see the chance for severe weather into the south by Thursday and Friday. As far as the snowfall totals, again, we're looking up to 4 feet of snow in some spots. So winter is not quitting in the west. Also lots of rain. We're looking at 5 inches possible in portions of the San Bernardino Mountains, and also looking at a flood risk tomorrow in portions of Southern California. Back to you guys.
Hoping people stay safe. Michelle Grossman, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.